She was just the girl behind the coffee counter. Invisible to most, unimportant to some, until one spilled drink, one cruel accusation, and one viral video almost destroyed her. "You're just a barista. Know your place." Those words were spat at her like poison, by a manager who mocked her skin, a co-worker who smiled while sabotaging her, and a stranger who filmed her lowest moment. But what no one knew was this: she spoke 6 languages. And 12 years ago, she'd saved someone whose name now held global power. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? If you love stories where justice hits back hard, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. And trust me, don't skip a second of this one. Because by the end, the woman they tried to humiliate will become the name no one dares forget. The buzz of gate announcements echoed through the terminal, blending with the hiss of espresso machines and the scent of scorched milk. It was 6:42 a.m., and the first rush was already hitting hard. Peggy adjusted her apron, wiped a drop of syrup off the counter, and forced a practiced smile at the next passenger in line. Businessman. Late 40s. Bluetooth is still in the ear. Didn't even look up when he said, "Grande Americano, extra hot, no talking." She nodded, not because she agreed, but because that was the rule. Don't talk back, just serve. The espresso hit the cup with a hiss. She handed it to him silently. He took it without a word. Another one passed, and another. At gate 19, nobody looked at the barista, only at the clock. The departures board, themselves. But Peggy noticed everything. She saw the toddler drop her toy twice while her mother pretended not to care. She saw the security guard flirting with the white receptionist and ignoring the elderly Vietnamese man asking for help. And she saw how her presence, her skin, her silence was either dismissed or resented. She'd worked this counter for 6 years. Same uniform, same terminal, same ignored potential. Nobody knew she had a degree in linguistics. Nobody asked how many languages she spoke, and even if they did, no one believed a coffee girl with braids, dark skin, and a southern accent could speak 6 languages fluently. English, French, Arabic, Spanish, Swahili, and Italian. But those names didn't matter here. Here her name was next. "Peggy," the shrill voice broke her thoughts. Brigitte, her manager, Belgian, 50-something, still wore perfume strong enough to sting the eyes. She strutted behind the counter like she owned every bean in the machine. "You missed." "A drop on the register," Brigitte snapped, pointing with a manicured finger at a single caramel smudge. Peggy bent down to wipe it. Silent. Brigitte leaned closer. "And fix your posture. You're slouching again. You want people thinking we hire lazy?" Peggy straightened, jaw locked. The words burned because they weren't about coffee or posture. They were about everything else: skin, class, power, and the silent rule, know your place. Brigitte lingered a second too long just to make sure Peggy felt small. Then she turned and left, clicking away in her red stilettos like a metronome of quiet cruelty. Peggy exhaled, slow, controlled. From across the concourse, her co-worker Tina waved at a security guard. Blonde, 24, fake smile, louder laugh. She barely touched the register, but always got compliments from Brigitte, always sent early for breaks, always flirting, always careless. Peggy had covered for her more times than she could count. Still, Tina called her background noise when she thought she couldn't hear. People like Peggy are born for this. Quiet jobs, nothing fancy, nothing visible. She heard. She always heard. It didn't matter. Peggy had learned long ago, invisibility was safer than fighting back. Until today. At 7:13 a.m., the air changed. Not the temperature, the attention. A woman in a flowing white hijab rushed to the counter, tears streaking her face. "My husband, baggage, someone took Arabic," she pleaded, broken English tumbling from panic. The receptionist froze. Security fumbled. Peggy moved. She stepped from behind the counter, gently touched the woman's arm, then spoke. Not in English, but in Arabic. soft, fluid, precise. The woman gasped in relief. Peggy translated every sentence, diffused the tension, alerted the airline staff, and explained the steps to recover the missing bag. The woman clutched Peggy's hand when it was over. "Thank you. Allah bless you." Peggy just smiled. "Je vous en prie." That last phrase, a whisper in French, meant nothing to most, but not to him. From a leather seat near gate 20, a man looked up. White button-down rolled at the sleeves, faint stubble, sharp jaw, eyes that had seen too much and missed nothing. He'd been scrolling through news headlines on his phone, headphones in, but that voice had sliced through the noise. Mason Taylor, 31. Award-winning. Documentary producer. He'd just returned from Cairo. His next project? The Invisible Workforce. Unseen stories from the front lines. He stood slowly, watching her. She didn't notice. She'd already gone back behind the counter, quiet, calm. But he remembered that voice, that phrasing, that tone. He'd heard it 12 years ago in a Paris train station from a 16-year-old girl who helped a frightened American teenager find his platform in a foreign world. She had said, "Je vous en prie," the same way, and he'd never forgotten. The terminal felt like a pressurized box of impatience. Voices overlapped, wheels rolled over tiles, children screamed, announcements buzzed and blurred together. Peggy wiped the counter again, though it was already clean. Her fingers moved out of habit, but her eyes scanned the crowd. The woman she helped earlier had already disappeared, escorted by a flight attendant who now avoided looking her way, as if crediting the barista for anything would disrupt some natural order. Peggy didn't care. At least she told herself that. Behind her, Brigitte muttered to another manager in French, not realizing Peggy could hear every word. Elle pense qu'elle est spéciale. Un accent ne fait pas une éducation. Peggy didn't flinch. She simply tucked the rag away and returned to brewing. The machine hissed. Another order, another face pretending not to see hers. But then came the voice. "I'm sorry. Does anyone speak Arabic?" The air snapped. It wasn't a scream. It was worse. It was desperation. A man in a beige thobe clutched his phone in one hand, a boarding pass in the other. His forehead glistened with sweat. Next to him, a teenage girl tugged his sleeve, crying silently. He looked around wildly, trying to speak to the staff. No one responded. He repeated louder. "Arabic, please someone, my wife, they separated us." A security guard turned his head and shrugged. The gate agent tapped her keyboard and waved him off without a word. Peggy was already moving. "Cow. Didn't ask for permission." She didn't explain. She stepped out from behind the bar and crossed the waiting area. "I speak Arabic," she said softly. The man turned, stunned. "Alhamdulillah." Peggy's voice shifted like silk, smooth, calm, precise. She switched languages mid-breath, her mouth forming phrases with native ease. She asked what happened, where his wife was last seen. What was her name? Her tone had the kind of clarity that makes people listen, even those who don't understand the words. A translator wasn't supposed to carry emotion, but Peggy wasn't supposed to be a barista either. She reached for her radio, bypassed the receptionist, and contacted internal assistance in English. "This is employee 45219. We have a priority passenger at gate 19 in need of urgent multilingual assistance. Arabic speaker on site. Possible family separation." The guard blinked. "You're just a..." Peggy didn't even look at him. She had locked eyes with the man's daughter instead. "Lat kafi," she whispered. "Don't be afraid." Moments later, 2 airline staff members jogged over, this time with real concern in their eyes. Peggy translated rapidly, not missing a beat. The girl's mother had been rerouted through secondary screening, a misflag in the system. It happened more than people admitted, especially with Arab names. 5 minutes later, the family was reunited. The woman burst into tears. The father kept repeating, "Shukran, shukran." Peggy nodded politely, then turned to leave. But before she could walk away, the woman grabbed her hand and kissed it. "You are the only one who saw us," she said in broken English. Peggy's smile faltered. She bowed slightly, responding gently, "Je vous en prie." 3 words, spoke with elegance, effortless French, tucked behind the curve of a farewell. From the corner of the seating lounge, Mason Taylor stood, frozen. His coffee was cold in his hand. He didn't know her name, but he knew that voice. 12 years ago, lost in Paris, afraid and alone, he'd heard that same phrase from a girl with steady eyes and calm hands. She had spoken French the same way, like it belonged to her. And now, here she was, in a coffee-stained apron, saving strangers while others stood still. He watched her walk back behind the counter, unnoticed by almost everyone, except one person. Brigitte. The manager's mouth twitched. Her eyes scanned the passengers who were still thanking Peggy, and she didn't like it. The next customer in line stepped up, a tall, white businessman in an expensive coat. "I'll have whatever that hero girl's having," he said jokingly, trying to charm the room. Brigitte swooped in before Peggy could answer. "She's not a translator," she barked. "Just a barista, please order properly." The man raised his eyebrows but complied. Still, he looked at Peggy once more, differently this time, like he was seeing something more than a name tag. Peggy said nothing, but something shifted inside her. Not defiance, not anger. Conviction. That night, in the locker room, she sat staring at her phone screen. The university email glowed faintly in the dim light. 3 years ago, she'd applied to a master's program in international communication. 3 times rejected, because her resume didn't show field experience, because she didn't have relevant exposure, because they couldn't see past the job title. She scrolled again. The rejection still sat in her inbox, unread, still stinging. She looked at her reflection in the metal locker, worn shoes, coffee-stained shirt, but steady eyes. She whispered to herself, 6 languages, 6 years, still here. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that Mason wasn't leaving the terminal. He had a call to make. The next morning, the air at Gate 19 felt charged. Not with excitement, but with something colder, heavier, like the pause before a storm breaks. Peggy sensed it the moment she walked in. Brigitte stood by the register, clipboard in hand, lips thin and tight. Her heels clicked across the tile. Like threats, her eyes scanned the counter, the floor, and Peggy's shoes. "You're late," she said flatly. Peggy checked her watch. 6:58 a.m. "I'm scheduled at 7. "Exactly." Brigitte turned away without waiting for a response. Behind the espresso machine, Tina leaned in with a syrup bottle and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's in one of those moods," she whispered. "You might want to keep your head down today, Peg." Peggy didn't respond. She grabbed her apron, tied it with mechanical precision, and slipped into her usual rhythm, filling milk jugs, restocking lids, checking grinders. But she felt it. Eyes, whispered tones, the stiffness in her co-workers' shoulders. The silence that wasn't just morning fatigue, it was loaded. Something had shifted overnight. Peggy didn't know yet that a video had been uploaded around 2 a.m. 38 seconds, shaky phone camera. Title, entitled, "Barista Freaks Out at Arab Family, Gets Schooled." The footage cuts in halfway through her interaction with the family from yesterday. There was no context, no explanation, just her raising her voice, calmly, clearly, in Arabic. Then a hard cut to her walking back behind the counter. Someone had layered music underneath, added subtitles, fake ones. The Arabic was mistranslated, deliberately. The caption, "Is she radicalized?" Peggy's name wasn't tagged, But the uniforms, the signage, the gate number, it was all visible. By 6:00 a.m., the clip had been shared on a dozen Twitter accounts and a travel blog with over 200,000 followers. By 7:10, Brigitte had seen it. Peggy didn't know that. Not yet. She was just trying to steam milk without shaking. It was Tina who started it. She walked past Peggy carrying a tray of espresso shots for Gate 20's lounge order. Her hip clipped the edge of a crate of flavored syrups. One bottle. Wobbled. Then another. Peggy lunged forward, catching the first, but the second hazelnut spun off the edge and exploded. It splattered across the marble, across Tina's tray, across the $900 leather duffel bag of the man standing next to the counter. He gasped. Tina froze. Peggy blinked. "I'm so sorry, sir." "She did it," Tina cut in, voice loud. "She pushed the tray." The man turned sharply. "Seriously?" "No, I didn't," Peggy said quietly. "The crate was too close to the—" "She's lying," Tina snapped. "She's been acting weird all morning. You've seen the video, right? About her yelling in Arabic?" The customer pulled out his phone, started filming. "Excuse." "Me?" Peggy said, trying to clean the mess. "Please, I need to—" But he didn't stop recording. He zoomed in on her hands, on her skin, on the spill. "She's the girl from the video," someone behind him muttered. "The one who yelled at that poor woman." Peggy's throat clenched. She looked at Brigitte for backup. But the manager just stood there, arms crossed. "Johnson," she said, tone sharp. "Back room now." The walk to the back felt like a walk through fire. Eyes followed her, judged her. Not one asked for her side. Inside the storage room, fluorescent lights buzzed. Cold. Air prickled her skin. Brigitte didn't sit. She didn't offer Peggy a seat either. "You've embarrassed this company." "I was helping." Brigitte held up her hand. "We don't need martyrs. We need consistency, quiet, efficiency." "That video is fake," Peggy said. "It's cut. It's misleading." "It doesn't matter." Brigitte stepped closer. "Perception is everything." Peggy swallowed, her voice lowered. "You know I didn't do anything wrong." Brigitte's voice dropped lower, cooler. "Let me make something clear. You are here because we allowed you to be here. That clip, it's not what ruined your image. You did." Peggy stared at her. "Is this because I speak Arabic?" "No," Brigitte smiled. "It's because you keep forgetting who you are." Peggy's hands curled into fists. "Effective immediately," Brigitte said, scribbling something on her clipboard. "You are reassigned to waste management rotation. You'll be cleaning the employee break room, back exits, and the northbound janitorial stations for the next 3 weeks." Peggy didn't blink. She didn't move. "Do you want to file a complaint?" Brigitte asked, almost laughing. "Go ahead, but remember this, I have HR in my pocket, and you have a TikTok scandal and no real title." Peggy nodded once, slowly. Then she turned and walked out. She didn't cry. Not until she was in the supply closet near Gate 17, sitting on an overturned mop bucket, arms wrapped around herself. The phone in her pocket buzzed. Another email. Another rejection from another internal transfer request. 12. All ignored. All under review. All forgotten. She opened the old folder in her gallery, the one labeled Proof, photos of her degree from Howard, letters of recommendation, international certifications, a picture of her and Sophie, the day Peggy walked out of college, to care for her sister. She looked at her reflection in the phone screen, and then she pressed record, not for TikTok, not for rage, but for memory. "My name is Peggy Johnson," she said, voice shaking but clear. "I speak 6 languages. I've worked at this airport for 6 years, and today I was punished for helping someone in need." She paused. "I won't disappear, not again." The mop bucket creaked beneath her as she leaned back against the wall. Her voice had been steady, but now the silence crashed over her like a wave. She pulled out her phone again, Not for the email, not for another application, but for the photo hidden deep in an old folder. Sophie, 10 years old, sitting in a hospital bed with a brace strapped to her spine, smiling like she didn't know the world had tilted against her. Peggy exhaled, slowly, the kind that comes from remembering a different life. Back then she wasn't a barista. She was a scholar, Dean's List every semester, double major, linguistics and international relations. She had a scholarship, a mentor, and an internship lined up with the State Department. Until one phone call shattered it all. Sophie's accident changed everything. Their aunt couldn't take her. Their mother had passed. It was Peggy or no. So she walked into her advisor's office that fall and said, "I need to withdraw." No tears, just a simple decision. "You're too gifted to throw it away," the advisor pleaded. She didn't. She just postponed her dreams. But the world didn't wait. One missed semester became two, then a job, then another. Until, eventually airports replaced embassies, aprons replaced business suits, and her name faded from the lists of rising stars. She had made peace with it, or thought she had. Until today. Now, after everything, after her hands had scrubbed the same tile for years while her resume gathered dust in a locked drawer, someone had dared to film her, edit her, reduce her, and still, one asked about the girl she gave it all up for. Peggy wiped her eyes. Then her screen. She wasn't ashamed of the past, but if they were going to drag her name through the dirt, she'd make sure they choked on the truth buried beneath it. Unbeknownst to her, just 2 terminals down, Mason Taylor was standing at the edge of a boarding gate talking to a young associate. "She's here," he said. "Gate 19, we need to speak to her today." The hallway outside Gate 19 felt colder than usual. Peggy's sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor as she pushed the mop bucket forward. Her back ached, her fingers were raw, and the citrusy smell of ammonia clung to her skin like a second punishment. She had spent the last 4 hours cleaning staff restrooms and employee break rooms, while Tina laughed somewhere near the departure gates with her clean record and a perfectly timed smile. Brigitte hadn't looked at her once all day, not since the reassignment, not since the viral video spread like wildfire through staff group chats. She had just finished rinsing the last mop head when she heard it, a low rustle of keys and boots behind her. A janitor, older, dark brown skin, salt and pepper beard, one of the overnight crew, always quiet, always invisible. He nodded at her mop bucket, then at the patch of citrus-slick floor between them. "Smells like Brigitte," he muttered. Peggy looked up, surprised. He didn't smile, just went back to wringing out his mop. But then, as he passed her, he paused. "Used to be a school." "Teacher," he said, eyes still on the floor, "before my accent got in the way." Peggy blinked. "What?" The man shrugged. "Didn't fit the image, so I started scrubbing floors for people who couldn't spell what I taught." Silence stretched between them, thick like ammonia and memory. Then he added, "Don't let 'em tell you who you are, especially the ones who can't do what you do." Peggy opened her mouth, but he was already walking away, keys jingling like a warning bell. At the end of the hallway, he stopped, looked back. "You got something special," he said. "I saw it. They have too. That's why they're scared." He disappeared around the corner. Peggy stood frozen for a moment, hands still dripping bleach water. No one had spoken to her like that in weeks. Not with pity, with recognition. She didn't even know his name. But in that second, it didn't matter. Someone had seen her, not for the uniform, not for the video, but for the thing that still burned inside her and refused to die. Peggy hadn't spoken a word since her shift began. But her mind was loud. They want me to break. They wanted her to be silent, obedient, ashamed. Instead, she kept scrubbing, but outside the janitor's hallway, the world was already burning. It started at 2:14 a.m. A TikTok account, newly. Created no real followers, no face. Posted a 12-second clip titled, "The Barista Who Thinks She's a Diplomat." The footage opened mid-sentence. Peggy's voice, calm but firm, was raised in Arabic. No context, no setup, no urgency. Just her voice, subtitled with bold, white lies. "Move or I'll get security. You're holding up real passengers. This isn't your country." None of it was real. The Arabic she used? Gentle, reassuring, professional. But the video had been altered. Tone adjusted, pauses removed, and fake subtitles added in just the right spots to twist the message. Worse, someone dubbed dramatic music underneath. A thumping beat, like a villain's theme, like she was the problem. The clip exploded. 20,000 views in the first 2 hours. Then a reaction stitch, a blonde influencer in athleisure whispering, "Am I the only one who thinks she's unhinged?" Then the comment storms. Another angry black woman. "These people always play the victim. Bet she doesn't even speak Arabic." By morning, the clip had hit travel blogs, airport horror compilations, and a Reddit thread called Entitled Staff Stories. Peggy didn't know yet. She was scrubbing staff toilets, unaware that her image was flashing across millions of screens, weaponized without consent. Tina knew. She was watching it behind the espresso machine, eyes wide, phone tilted away when Peggy passed by. Brigitte had seen it too, but she said nothing, only smirked when her staff forwarded it in private group chats with gifs of eye rolls and face palms. No one asked for Peggy's side. No one checked the source. In a world obsessed with viral, the truth was too slow. And Peggy. She was about to walk into a storm she didn't start, but that everyone had already decided she deserved. She was rinsing out a gray mop head in the janitor's sink behind the north exit when the knock came. It wasn't a loud bang, just 3 sharp taps. She turned, slowly. A man stood in the doorway, casual, calm, but there was a stillness in his expression that didn't match the bustle of the terminal. He wasn't in uniform, he didn't look like management. But Peggy felt it instantly. This man had power. "Are you Peggy Johnson?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Who's asking?" He stepped forward, his voice lowered. "Mason Taylor." Silence, but not blank silence. The kind that pulls memories out of the dark. She blinked. "Wait, the filmmaker." His lips curled into a half smile. "You remember. Of course, your film, Nations Between Us, one can." He nodded, then paused. "And I remember you." Peggy's arms tensed. She gripped the edge. The metal sink. "I've never met you," she said slowly. "Not since Paris," he replied. That stopped her. Her breath caught in her chest. "I was 19, lost. Gare du Nord. I had no idea how to get to the Charles de Gaulle transfer train. My French was terrible. Everyone ignored me until this girl appeared. Younger than me, calm, confident. She said, 'Je vous en prie,' like it was a lifeline." Peggy stared at him. "I remember," she whispered. "You had a torn backpack. And no charger. You looked like you hadn't slept in days." He laughed quietly. "I hadn't." They both stood in the quiet hum of the janitor's corridor. Two people whose lives had twisted apart, now unexpectedly aligned again. "You remembered me?" she finally asked. "I remembered your voice," Mason said. "And when I heard it again, yesterday, I knew." Peggy shook her head. 12 years. You recognize me by one sentence?" "It wasn't just the words," he said. "It was the way you said them. Like you didn't just speak French, you understood people." Her throat tightened. She looked away. "You're scrubbing floors," he said quietly. "Why?" She didn't answer, not at first. Then she wiped her hands slowly on her apron and faced him. "Because I left school to take care of my sister. I applied for every translation and culture liaison job at this airport for 4 years. Because HR never called back. Because Brigitte lost my file. Because Tina Sabotaged me and still got promoted. Mason's jaw tightened. And because, she added, when you're a black woman with ambition in a uniform, ambition becomes a threat. He didn't interrupt. I'm not ashamed of working, she continued, but I'm sick of being erased. There was silence again, this time not empty but weighted, like something just shifted. Mason reached into his coat and pulled out a slim black folder. I'm not here to pity you, he said. I'm here because I'm building something. A documentary series, 6 parts, on the invisible workforce. In America, people like you, multilingual, brilliant, overlooked. He handed her the folder. Inside was a project proposal, a film crew itinerary, and a single line under potential cultural consultant, Peggy Johnson. She looked up, startled. You already put my name here? He shrugged. I hoped I wasn't wrong. Her fingers brushed the page. I don't want charity. You wouldn't last a day in my world if that's what this was, he said evenly. I need you. Because you're better at this than anyone I've met. Because yesterday, you translated a human crisis in seconds. And because I think you deserve the mic for once. Peggy exhaled slowly. Her voice cracked. I don't even know if I still belong in that world. Mason leaned forward. Then let me remind you. Just then, footsteps echoed behind. Them. Bridget. She froze at the sight. Her face went pale. Mason? She asked, voice high, rehearsed. I didn't know you were. I asked to speak to Ms. Johnson, Mason cut in. Privately. Bridget's smile twitched. She's on janitorial duty. There must be a mistake. No, Mason replied. The mistake was hers, and it's over. He turned back to Peggy. If you want in, you have 48 hours. We fly to D.C. on Thursday. You'll be consulting and co-directing. Co-directing? Brigitte sputtered. She speaks 6 languages, he said flatly. What do you speak? Brigitte opened her mouth, closed it, stormed off. Peggy stood there, breath shallow, eyes wide. Mason offered one final word. Say yes, and say it loud. Then he turned and walked out. She stood there long after the door closed, her fingers still holding the folder, her heart pounding like it wanted to scream. But her voice stayed low, steady. Je vous en prie, she whispered again. This time, to herself. The conference room on level 3 wasn't grand, but it smelled like power. It was the kind of space where deals were made in whispers and reputations were destroyed in seconds. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the tarmac, the hum of distant jet engines underscoring every word said inside. Peggy had never stepped foot in this part of the airport. Now she stood at the center of it. Not in her apron, not with a mop, but in a pressed navy blouse, slacks that didn't smell like bleach, and a lanyard that read, Cultural Consultant, Documentary Access Level 3. She held the folder Mason had given her, tight, like armor. Across from her sat 6 people, producers, coordinators, brand reps, most of them white, most of them not looking at her for more than 2 seconds at a time. All except one, Celeste. Legs crossed, hair smooth, blazer sharper than the tension in the room. She was the brand director of the series, and Mason's ex. She tilted her head, smiling like a cat who smelled blood. I must have missed the memo, Celeste said coolly, flipping through papers. We're taking on interns now? The room chuckled lightly. Peggy didn't. She placed the folder on the table, opened it. Quiet, intentional. No, she said. I'm here because Mason requested a cultural advisor with direct multilingual field experience. 6 years working in an international transit zone. 6 languages. 0 tolerance for PR disasters caused by bad translation. Celeste blinked. A beat passed. Then she smiled wider. Of course. I'm sure you've done some fascinating latte art in your time. Peggy's jaw tightened. Mason walked in just then. He didn't speak. didn't sit. He just looked around and said, "Begin." One producer cleared his throat. "We're building episode 2 around themes of miscommunication in transit. Hubs. The goal is to capture real human moments, high stress, cross-cultural, vulnerable." He paused, glancing at Peggy. "Which is why we appreciate your insights." Peggy nodded, calm. "Then may I ask, who's reviewing your translations for the Arabic segments?" Celeste lifted a hand. "We've already contracted a vendor." Peggy turned the page in her folder, pulled out a copy of the draft script. Highlighted in red were phrases mistranslated from English, some dangerously so. "This line," she said, pointing, "translates in dialect as you. People cause delay. In certain regions it reads as a racial slur." Silence. Another page flipped. "This phrase implies the passenger is not intelligent enough to read instructions, which violates ADA standards and basic human decency." Mason didn't. Blink. Celeste shifted in her chair. "I'm sure that's subjective," she said tightly. "I confirmed with 2 regional experts," Peggy replied, "and ran the phrases through 3 cultural vetting systems." She looked up, met every eye in the room. "I'm not here to be nice, I'm here to keep this project from collapsing on its ego." A long pause. Then Mason spoke. "Keep her on everything from this point forward." Celeste's voice sliced in. "With all due respect, Mason." "No," he said firm. "You're the one who pushed the vendor. You're the one who greenlit the copy. She's the one who just saved us from offending half a continent." Peggy stood still, not triumphant, not smug, just grounded. Because this wasn't luck. It was what she was trained to do, what she had always done, just never given credit. Vorisi, Celeste leaned back, mask cracking. "Well, we'll need to review her background, of course," she muttered. "Verify credentials, experience, see what formal titles she has." Peggy met her gaze. Howard University, Linguistics, Class of 2017, Certified Arabic English Interpreter, Swahili Fluency, Nairobi Immersion Program 2018, 2 peer-reviewed academic essays. 1 on gendered miscommunication in transit zones. She took a breath. And 1 on how qualified Black women are systematically denied positions in cross-cultural institutions, despite outperforming peers in live simulations. The room went still. Mason leaned forward, almost smiling. "Anyone else want to test her credentials?" But outside the boardroom, someone was already laying the next trap. Celeste sat in her glass office, phone pressed to her ear, voice a silk thread pulled taut. "No, don't post it under the company account. Use the side blog, the one for industry gossip." She paused. "Title it something like From Latte to Liar." The consultant raising eyebrows behind the scenes. She smiled without warmth. The article went live within the hour. Anonymous, but precise in tone. It questioned Peggy's rapid rise, called it suspicious, claimed sources had seen her bullying her way into a consultant title, questioned if her degree was real, even hinted that she was using racial sensitivity to silence criticism. The blog wasn't mainstream, but it didn't need to be. It spread like oil. 3 reposts, then 7, then 40. By the next morning, Mason's inbox was full of half-concerned, half-panicked messages from sponsors. But Peggy, she walked into the glass atrium like the ground wasn't shifting beneath her. Mason met her in the elevator, showed her the article. For 1 second, her eyes narrowed. Then she reached into her leather binder, pulled out a folder, thicker than the last. "Good," she said calmly. "Let's answer them all." Inside were her original university transcripts, certified degree copy from Howard, letter from the Nairobi Immersion Program Director, test results from the UN interpreters, evaluation panel, even copies of the 2 peer-reviewed articles with DOIs and faculty endorsements. Mason flipped through each page, face unreadable. Then he smirked. "She thought she could question you." Peggy's voice didn't rise. She thought, The lie would spread faster than the truth. She paused. But I kept receipts. He handed the folder to his assistant. Upload every page. Send it to PR and caption it, "Credentials, not charisma." Hours later, the blog was forced to issue a retraction. But the damage had already reversed, because Peggy didn't just survive the hit, she diffused it with precision. And now everyone watching knew. She wasn't lucky. She was legitimate. Peggy closed her folder, stood. "I have prep work to do for our Cairo segment. If we're done here." She turned and walked out. Every eye followed. Down the hallway, her breath caught up to her body. Her heart pounded, her fingers trembled, but her spine stayed straight. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until she reached the elevator. It was Celeste. Her voice dropped low and venom-laced. "You don't belong in that room." Peggy didn't turn around. "I earned it," she said. Celeste laughed bitterly. "You're still just a charity case in new clothes. He'll get bored, or you'll slip. And when you do, I'll be right there." Peggy faced her, calm. "Steady. Then I won't slip," she said. The elevator doors opened. Peggy stepped in, alone, and smiled. The air inside the airport cafe was too still for 6 a.m. Peggy could feel it even before she pushed open the side door marked "Staff Only." A strange hush hovered above the regular clatter. Baristas whispered behind the counter. One cashier avoided her eyes altogether. The espresso machine steamed like it was trying to fill the silence, but it couldn't drown out what she already knew. Something was wrong. Then she saw the screen above the pastry shelf. The local news feed flickered, her face frozen mid-sentence from the last staff meeting, now paired with a new headline. "From coffee girl to consultant, social media darling or dangerous hype." Someone had leaked the footage, the meeting, her comments, the boldness with which she called out to Celeste, and underneath the video, a conveniently anonymous source claimed Peggy had exaggerated her credentials, manipulated her way into Mason's favor, and weaponized racial sympathy to gain access to the documentary team. The article was unsigned, but the fingerprints were obvious. Brigitte's voice rang out before she even turned around. Well, celebrity's back. Peggy turned slowly, shoulders square. Brigitte leaned against the counter, arms folded, smile cutting like glass. Must be nice, having people fight your battles. Peggy stepped forward. "Is there something you need from me?" "I need you to understand something," Brigitte said, her tone sweet with venom. "Some of us had to work for years to get into these rooms, not just show up with a sob story and a pretty accent. I worked 6 years in this airport," Peggy said, voice low, steady, in silence with grace, "while you kept my resume at the bottom of a drawer." Brigitte laughed. "You were never going to get that job. You don't fit our image." Peggy's stomach knotted, but she didn't flinch. Brigitte leaned closer, whispering like a threat. "You don't get to rewrite the rules just because you had one lucky moment." Peggy's phone buzzed in her hand. She stepped back, pulled it up. A message from Mason. "Meet me in conference room 2A, urgent." She left without another word. As she turned the corner, Tina stepped into her path. "Oh, hi," Tina said, voice high and innocent. "Just so you know, there's a petition going round. Some of the staff feel like you're abusing the system. You know, skipping ranks." Peggy looked at her. "Did you start it?" Tina blinked, faux offense curling across her face. "I would never." Peggy didn't reply. She just walked past, heart pounding, throat dry, but steps firm. The conference room door creaked open. Inside, Mason sat at the table, laptop open, brows drawn. Next to him sat Zoe, a new HR recruitment. Analyst Peggy had only seen twice, young, sharp-eyed, and deeply uncomfortable. "Close the door," Mason said. Peggy obeyed. Then he spun the laptop around. Her staff file. Every transfer request. Every certification. Every email, denied, ignored, buried. Zoe cleared her throat. Started reviewing the internal records. When you were appointed to the consultant team, I was confused why someone with your qualifications had no HR. Movement for years. She slid over a folder. Peggy opened it slowly. 12 transfer requests, denied by Brigitte and Mr. Whitmore, the director of operations. Zoe continued nervously. Your application files were tagged. Not a cultural fit. Peggy blinked. Not underqualified. Not ineligible. Just not a cultural fit. Mason stood. I had my team dig further. He tapped the laptop. Turns out Whitmore has a niece. She owns a private translation firm that's been contracting with the airport for years, at triple market rate, despite having no verifiable credentials. In Arabic or Swahili. Peggy swallowed. It all clicked. The failed translations, the fake certification, the contracts. Mason's voice sharpened. You were blocked, not ignored, strategically silenced. Peggy stared at the folder on the table, but her mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was 3 years ago. A rainy Thursday. She'd just finished a night shift, hands raw from bleach, voice hoarse from calling names no one heard. She remembered sitting in the staff hallway, filling out another online application with trembling fingers. It was a long shot, but the firm looked promising. Whitbridge Global Translations. They had contracts across 3 terminals and promised multilingual advancement. Sounded real, solid, like a door opening. She'd written the perfect cover letter. Attached are all certifications, double-checked grammar 5 times, and 2 days later the response came. Cold, precise, dismissive. Thank you for applying. Unfortunately, we are pursuing candidates whose tone aligns more closely with our brand identity. 1 line below. Your assertiveness may be better suited for other professional environments. She remembered staring at those words until they blurred. She'd asked herself if she sounded too confident, if she had softened her language, played humbly, erased herself a little. Now the truth snapped into place. That rejection hadn't come from an algorithm. It came from a gatekeeper, Whitmore's niece, a woman who ran a firm with no real fluency in Arabic or Swahili, but charged triple to fake it. The same woman who probably skimmed her resume and laughed. Peggy's knuckles whitened. She remembered how that email stung more than the others, because that one, it felt personal, like someone had looked her in the eye and said, "Not you." Now she knew why. It had nothing to do with tone, nothing to do with her skills. It was because someone had already claimed the throne, and Peggy, with her braids, her tired eyes, her perfect pronunciation, was a threat. Zoe looked up, sensing the shift. You okay? She asked softly. Peggy closed the file. No, she said, but I see it now. Her voice was flat, clear. Not broken, just ready. Zoe nodded. And the news article this morning, it was submitted through an encrypted proxy, but our security team traced the metadata, uploaded from a terminal, in the staff lounge. Peggy closed her eyes. Tina, Brigitte, and, behind them, Whitmore. Mason sat again. This isn't just office politics, it's systemic suppression, and it's about to explode. Peggy stared at the file in her hands. She didn't feel angry. She felt ready. What do we do? She asked. We start with this, Mason said. Tomorrow you're leading the welcome session for the incoming Middle Eastern delegation. You'll speak, publicly. We'll broadcast it to the press. The original translator, removed. You're in. Peggy's hands trembled. I'm not asking if you're nervous, Mason added. I'm asking if you're ready to burn the whole thing down if they try to stop you. Peggy looked up. I've been burning quietly for years, she said. Let them feel the fire now. The sky outside the international terminal was still dark when Peggy stepped through the sliding glass doors. Inside, the lights were blinding. Everything gleamed. Polished marble, silver-framed security, gates, digital banners welcoming delegates in Arabic, English, and Chinese, cameras, flags, and eyes. Too many eyes. She adjusted the wireless earpiece in her right ear and clutched the folder tighter against her chest. This wasn't the staff corridor anymore. This was the VIP wing, the place she used to mop, scrub, and clean in silence while others drank champagne. Now she stood at the edge of the media zone, badge around her neck, ready to speak to a room full of international officials, journalists, airport executives, and enemies waiting for her to choke. Tina hovered by the coffee table, pretending to adjust pastries. Brigitte stood stiffly by the corner doors, arms crossed, lips a tight line. Celeste wasn't present, but her fingerprints were everywhere, from the cold stares to the overly rehearsed seating arrangements. Peggy took a breath. Mason approached from behind, placing a calm hand on her shoulder. "You good?" She didn't nod. She just said, "Let's begin." The host, an assistant PR officer, stepped up to the podium. "We'd like to welcome our guests to today's international welcome briefing for the Cairo-New York Transit Corridor collaboration. And now we'll begin with a statement from our lead cultural consultant and language advisor, Ms. Peggy Johnson." The applause was polite, thin, but Peggy heard the silence underneath it. She stepped up. One step, another. Each click of her heel echoed like a challenge. The lights were too bright, the Ruiz M too cold. But her voice, when it came, was warm. "Good morning," she said into the mic. "Before I speak in English, allow me to greet our guests properly." And then she shifted. Arabic flowed from her lips like a river, fluent, full, formal, no accent, no hesitation. Eyes widened. A few guests tilted their heads, surprised, delighted. Then she changed. French, then Swahili. 3 languages. Under 60 seconds, no stumbles, no notes. She wasn't just translating. She was communicating, mediating, building trust. When she returned to English, the room was no longer waiting for her to fail. It was leaning in. Language is not just words, she said clearly. It's identity. Misused, it can offend. Ignored, it can erase people, but when used with care, it can build bridges where there were only walls. A man in the front row, tall, suited with a diplomatic badge, nodded slowly. Peggy turned. The page in her folder. Unfortunately, the initial briefing materials for this event included multiple errors. One phrase implied that Middle Eastern passengers were more likely to misunderstand gate instructions, an implication rooted not in fact, but in prejudice. A ripple moved through the crowd. Brigitte shifted in the back. Tina's face stiffened. Peggy held her gaze forward. These translations came from an external firm, a vendor approved without verification. Their errors could have caused diplomatic strain, but they were corrected, quietly, by me. She let the words land. No boasting, just a fact. She didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough. Cameras. Clicked. A few journalists leaned closer, scribbling notes. Peggy closed the folder. Respect begins with recognition. So let this be a new standard, not just for this terminal, but for every place where silence once buried skill. Then she stepped back. Applause didn't explode. It rose. Gradually, genuinely. Even the diplomatic official stood to clap. Mason nodded once from the back. Peggy returned to her seat as her legs trembled, not with fear, but with adrenaline. The kind that rises not when you run, but when you stand still and refuse to move for anyone. She had barely sat down when the Arab delegate walked over. "You speak like my daughter," he said in Arabic. She was told to become quieter. "You reminded me why she shouldn't." Peggy smiled. "Then tell her to speak louder." Brigitte didn't approach. She left the room before the questions began. But Tina stayed, hovered, watching. And when the crowd thinned, she slithered close, voice syrupy sweet. "Well done," she said. "But just remember, it only takes one mistake." Peggy turned to face her, voice steady. "Then don't stand so close, you might be the one who makes it." Tina blinked. Peggy walked away. Later that night, in a corner office Mason had arranged for her temporary use, Peggy sat with her shoes off, her jacket folded neatly, and her laptop open. Her inbox was filling. Messages from embassies, translators, airport staff in other cities. Black women she didn't know saying, "I saw you speak. You sounded like me." She didn't cry, but she let her breath out slowly and whispered, "You saw me." A knock came. Zoe from HR peeked in, eyes wide. "I thought you'd want to. See this?" She handed Peggy a document, records from the old vendor. Inflated invoices, duplicate charges, a list of staff emails who flagged them. Every one of them, ignored or reassigned. "I'm not the only one," Peggy said softly. "No," Zoe replied. "You're just the first who refused to shut up." Peggy smiled faintly. That night she closed her laptop and stared out at the runway lights blinking in the distance. Her voice had always been sharp, but now it echoed. And people finally listened. Gate A had never seen this many people. Executives, translators, staff from every wing of the terminal, representatives from partner airlines, foreign delegates in tailored suits, and press, plenty of press. But none of them knew what was about to happen. Peggy stood just off stage, behind the curtain of a temporary backdrop branded with the airport's global outreach logo. Her fingers grazed the folded edges of the speech in her hand, but her eyes weren't on the paper. They were locked on. The man standing near the refreshments table, Thomas Whitmore, Director of Operations, calm, untouchable, smiling like he always did, as if this room, this terminal, the air itself belonged to him. Peggy had seen that smile before, when he shook hands with donors, when he nodded politely during cultural briefings. He never cared about it. And when he quietly stamped, "Denied." On her transfer forms, 12 times, Zoe appeared beside her. Breathe quickly, voice low. "He's here. Mason's prepping the media team, and he's bringing the board." Peggy's heart skipped once, not in fear, in certainty. Today wouldn't end with applause. It would end with truth. Across the terminal, Brigitte paced near a side pillar. She hadn't made eye contact with Peggy since the event started, but her posture said everything. Stiff, braced. She knew. The moment came fast. Mason stepped onto the small stage and tapped the mic. "Thank you for joining us today. I'll keep this brief. This week, our airport hosted a delegation of international partners to reimagine how we handle cultural translation, guest treatment, and multilingual support. It's a conversation long overdue." He paused. Unfortunately, behind that delay was a wall. One built not from language barriers but internal ones. Barriers that buried qualified talent, overpaid unqualified vendors, and silenced those who spoke up. The room tensed. Peggy stepped forward. She didn't need the speech. Her voice, steady, cut through the silence. "My name is Peggy Johnson. 6 years ago, I was hired here as a barista. Not because I couldn't do more, but because someone decided that's all I was allowed to be." She glanced at Whitmore. He smiled tighter. "I applied 12 times for roles in cultural coordination. My credentials were stronger than most applicants, but every time I was rejected, without explanation." Peggy opened the folder. In this file are the reasons listed. Not a cultural fit. Lacks visibility. No formal recommendation. All signed by Director Whitmore. Murmurs. Flashbulbs popped. She held up another document. "Here is a list of translation contracts awarded to a firm owned by his niece. Triple market rate, no language certification. And every one of those contracts included errors. Errors that nearly derailed an international partnership." Whitmore stepped forward. "This is slander," he barked. Mason didn't flinch. "We traced the payments, we traced the emails. We traced the fake certification she submitted." Zoe stepped up beside Peggy, and we found dozens of suppressed transfer applications, not just from Ms. Johnson, but from others, mostly black, mostly women, all qualified. The room erupted. Peggy didn't move. She looked at Brigitte now. And as for my manager, she buried every document I submitted, until I was scrubbing floors while teaching myself to keep smiling. Brigitte's voice cracked. She wasn't the only one. There were rules. No, Peggy said. There was racism. There was fear, and there was convenience. A beat passed. Then Mason turned to the crowd. As of this morning, Mr. Whitmore is suspended pending termination. Ms. Brigitte Duval has been removed from all personnel oversight and placed under internal review. Security guards stepped forward. Whitmore's smile collapsed into disbelief. You can't, he started. You did it to yourself, Mason said flatly. As they escorted him out, Brigitte followed, pale and trembling. But the room wasn't finished. Because something was happening. The back of the audience shifted. People in staff uniforms were stepping forward. Janitors, baggage handlers, cafeteria workers, maintenance techs. They weren't speaking, but they clapped, slow, heavy, loud, the kind of applause that came from people who never expected to be seen. Peggy swallowed hard, her voice just a whisper. Now. We're not asking for power, just recognition. Mason turned back to the mic. And starting today, that recognition becomes policy. Every hiring and promotion over the last 5 years will be audited. Every qualified employee buried in the system will be reviewed. And we will never again allow brilliance to be hidden behind aprons and silence. More applause. Some loud, some theory, but all honest. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Peggy sat on a bench near Gate A, shoes off, shoulders loose. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't performing. She just was. Zoe sat beside her. You did it, she said softly. Peggy looked out at the gate doors. No, she replied. We did. Behind them, the airport buzzed like it always had. But something fundamental had shifted. For everyone watching. For everyone who had ever been told to stay in their place. That place had moved. Because someone refused to stay quiet. The office smelled like new paint and roasted coffee. Sunlight poured through the wide glass window, catching the gold lettering on the door. Peggy Johnson, Director of Multicultural Communications. Peggy stood inside alone, barefoot, her heels neatly placed under the desk. The silence wasn't heavy. It was earned. Earned in scraped knees, sleepless nights, and words finally spoken. On the wall across from her, a framed still from the press conference hung beside a photo of her and her sister Sophie at graduation, holding hands, the edges of their smiles slightly blurred. She glanced down at the screen of her laptop. Dozens of unopened emails, offers, invitations, speaking requests. 2 universities had already reached out for guest lecturing, and 1 envelope from Cairo, handwritten, sat unopened on her desk. She didn't reach for it yet. Instead, she turned toward the door as a familiar knock sounded. Zoe stepped in, eyes bright. Everyone's waiting in the conference room. Peggy smiled. How's the final edit? Zoe handed her a flash drive. Stunning, honest, painful, and still hopeful. They walked together down the now familiar corridor of the terminal's executive wing. The same halls where whispers once followed Peggy's every step now echoed with open greetings. In the conference room, Mason stood at the head of the table. Around him were senior board members, department leads, and, at the back, staff from every level, janitors, baristas, technicians, no longer silent. Mason gave a nod, and the room dimmed. The screen behind him flickered to life. The documentary opened not with narration but with Peggy's voice. I was never invisible. They just refused to look. Images rolled. Peggy was speaking Arabic to the panicked father. Tina glanced smugly as coffee spilled. Brigitte looked down at a clipboard while Peggy cleaned the floor. A montage of rejected applications. A freeze. Frame on the line. Not a cultural fit. Then came the reversal. The gate a speech. The delegates rose in applause. The board meeting where names were finally held accountable. Murmurs rippled through the room. The video ended on one quiet shot. Peggy, standing behind a counter, pouring a cup of coffee, then looking directly into the lens. I still make coffee, she says, but now I choose who I serve it to. Applause broke the silence. Real, relentless. Peggy didn't look away. When the room quieted, Mason spoke. We're proud to announce the launch of the Voices Unseen initiative, a full-scale equity program to identify and elevate underrepresented talent already within our workforce. It's built by Peggy, led by Peggy. He turned to her. And named for every voice that was ignored until now. Later that day, Peggy returned to her office. On her desk sat a new envelope, sealed in deep green, embossed with gold trim. She opened it. Inside, a letter from the University of Applied Linguistics Amsterdam, an offer for a visiting professorship, an invitation to build an exchange program for students of color, a postscript handwritten by Professor Van Ton. Some talents are never truly hidden, just waiting for the right moment to speak. Peggy. Let the paper rest on her lap. She thought about the mop handle she once held, the names she memorized while sweeping, the coffee spills, the bitter stares. She rose. She walked back into the terminal. Gate 19 was still there, smelled the same grind of wheels on tile, same buzz of voices. But something was different. People noticed her now. Not because of a scandal, not out of pity, but because her story had cracked the glass. Behind the barista counter, a new girl worked. Young, dark-skinned, nervous. She fumbled with a cup, cheeks flushing. Peggy stepped beside her. Relax, she said gently. Take a breath, then try again. The girl did. The coffee landed just right. What's your name? Peggy asked. Jasmine, she whispered. Do you speak any languages? The girl paused. French, a little Japanese. Peggy smiled. Don't ever hide that. A woman walked up, tourist badge clipped to her bag. Excuse me, she asked, eyeing Peggy. You're the one from the video, right? Peggy nodded. The woman fumbled, then held up her phone. Do you mind? Peggy leaned in. Only if you tag the coffee girl behind me, too. She's next. The woman smiled, snapped the picture. As Peggy walked away, she heard Jasmine whisper to the next customer. She's our boss. No pride, just the truth. Back in her office, Peggy placed a new item on her shelf. Not the award from the board, not the translated contract. A single, worn paper cup, labeled in Sharpie, Arabic, French, Swahili, Italian, English, Spanish. She had written it years ago, when no one believed her. Now it was proof. Not of language, of legacy. If this story moved you, made you pause, or reminded you of someone who deserves to be seen, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read to everyone. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll be back soon with another true-to-life journey that proves dignity, courage, and quiet strength always find their way to the light. Until then, stay bold, stay kind, and never forget, your voice matters.